And welcome back. Our first conversation this morning is with former Belize City Mayor Darrell Bradley. He's here to talk to us this morning about happenings within the United Democratic Party and, of course, everything that we need to know in terms of where you are in your political career, where you are in your professional life as well. Good morning.
Good morning.
Darrell. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. I just want to say that I can't speak for the United Democratic Party.
But you're an observer.
I am an observer.
Much like the rest of us,
yes.
right? And I'm certain that you have an opinion on what's taking place.
Of course.
All right. So let's start there. So there was an NPC over the course of the weekend. Perhaps this is the third over the period of a year, right? The previous two fell apart in spectacular fashion. Saturday wasn't without its flair and its own drama, right? What do you make of what you see happening within the UDP?
Well, to a certain extent, I'm hopeful that the United Democratic Party could get it together and the party could emerge unified under one leader. And I'm also disheartened because within the democratic space, you need an opposition. And we've traditionally always been a two-party system. And I think for the health of our democracy, for a government that is accountable and built on good democratic values, you need two parties. And you need two vibrant, well-organized, robust parties that offer people a division. And it was obvious in the last election that we didn't really have that choice. And when you don't have that choice, you don't really have a spirited public debate about options and where we want to move the country forward.
Now, this infighting within the UDP has dragged on, some would say, for far too long. If you're talking about being able to form, in this case, a robust opposition that could stand up against the government of the day, whenever the UDP get together, it doesn't seem as if though there's unity.
Yeah.
It seems that there's more chaos than anything else. Let's look at it from a bit broader perspective where opposition to what is taking place in government, at this point, there really isn't, or it doesn't feel as if though there's any opposition to be had, other than the media stepping in at some points to create some kind of check and balance.
Yeah. No, and that's true, and that's critical. You need a formal opposition in the centers of government, so in the National Assembly, in the House meetings and the Senate, that can get access to information, that is there when legislation is being passed, and that can put that perspective to represent a different voice. And without that, our democracy is really crippled. I remember in our history, we've had fragmented political parties. The United Democratic Party is a merger of three political parties, which were really very small and splintered. And it was with that force that they first formed the government in 1984. So I think within our democracy, you really need that. And there's a lot of people who support the United Democratic Party traditionally and even now. And you want to give those people who are not supporters of the government an organized voice that they could channel dissent. So you were talking earlier on about the protests and issues with the unions and so forth, but those are civil society agencies. You want something that feeds into the formal political structure and that can give people an option in relation to electoral seats and that can potentially form a government leading the country in a different direction.
We look at the issues that are taking place within the opposition. As somebody from the outside, and I think I can speak for the viewers' behalf on behalf of the viewers when I say that it's all a little bit confusing to us. And I can safely say that with having conversations with all opposition leaders, including the former UDP leader and the current one. We still haven't really fully understood how they utilize the Constitution to be able to uphold the actions that they have been taking over the past few years.
Of course.
So how are we as citizens supposed to understand what to do with this issue, or how are we supposed to look at this issue when they're saying, I am politically correct because I am using the Constitution, I am the one that is doing it correctly, and the other person is saying the same thing?
Well, one of the things that I would want to respond is understanding what leadership is about. Leadership is about service and sacrifice. And one of the things that I'm oftentimes very humbled by, I remember this is an American context. This was the vice president then, Al Gore, and he contested the election against George Bush.
And lost.
And he lost, but he felt that he won. He took it to court. And he gave a famous speech, concession speech, which said that I understand that I won. I am vociferously in opposition with what is going on, but for the good of the nation, I will offer my concession. And I think in leadership, we have to realize that it's bigger than us. This is not about who leads the United Democratic Party. This is about the hundreds of thousands of Belizeans who want a better life, and government whose primary obligation is to provide an enabling environment to allow people to experience a quality living that promotes human dignity and social transformation. So the thing that I look at, and I'm very worrisome in the United Democratic Party, is that all of this is noise. No one cares about that. Get it together and lead a vision for the country that offers people a viable option to move the country forward, so that in terms of the constitution, the political decision making, what mechanism, people they're not interested in that. They're not interested really in who is the leader of the opposition. They want somebody who can bring the party together, somebody who can offer a viable alternative, and somebody who can bring ideas to fray that will transform the country.
At this point, however, because the party is so factionalized, it seems that there's they'll forgive my language here, it seems more like a pissing contest than anything else, in terms of the two parties constantly bucking heads and failing to coalesce into one, and then presenting or mounting a formidable opposition.
Yeah. Well, this again, it goes back to the question, what's my responsibility and my role? Politics is about fundamentally bringing people together. If you can't do that, then you are not effective in what you're doing. If you cannot have a groundswell, and if you cannot unify people, which is evidently what we could not do in the last election, if you can't do that, then we have to have people who can do that. You have to have people who have a heart for the country, who are about service, who are about ideas, and who the majority of people can gravitate around. If you are unable to do that, then we're just wasting our time.
But it seems that persons that have been a part of this, tit for tat for so long, are holding on to a seat of power because perhaps they don't know what to do with their lives after they're done.
Yeah.
How do we try our best to move away from that sort of mentality?
Well, I think it's only power if the people give it power. So you're having a lot of these conversations with the opposition, and in reality, I don't watch it. And I don't follow it, because to me it's a waste of time. What I want to do is I want to be over here where we're having national conversations about moving the country forward. This weekend I was at a conference in Miami which were talking about diaspora and integrating the diaspora into national development. Those people are really interested in the country. I saw the unions, and they were, raising certain issues, and that's always a good thing because it adds to a new brand of the democracy, so that you would be surprised that people who think they have power really don't have power. They only have power because you make noise and people think that there's something going on there. But fundamentally, the question is, how can we offer a viable alternative for the people of Belize? There is scope and there's necessity for a vibrant opposition. And without these people getting things together, we won't have that. And eventually what will happen is that I have read several parts of the Bible. And you have several instances where God would call people to do certain things. And when those people don't answer the call, immediately they jump ship to somebody else. And that's what's going to happen. If you can't get your thing together and we need an opposition, people will just bypass that as being irrelevant. And that has been the history of our country. The history of our country has been a history of change and transformation. And if those people can't get it together, people will say, hey, you know what, maybe somebody else can.
I personally think that perhaps we're teetering on the brink of the UDP being irrelevant in the national discourse, because, like I said, it would seem that they have been at it amongst each other for an inordinate period of time. If you look at any preparations for the last general elections, both sides did their own thing, took it to court, right? The elections came and went, they lost 26 seats, in essence, only 5 of them are in the House, and there's still this infighting. My question is, do you believe that if one has effectively resigned as party leader and another has effectively resigned as chairman, that they ought to have returned in any capacity to try to bring the party together when perhaps for all intents and purposes they were a part of the problem?
I think that fundamentally you have to recognize that leading a party is about being able to win political elections. And it has affected me negatively, but there's a provision in the UDP constitution that says that in order to be leader of the party, you have to be in the National Assembly. You have to either be an elected representative or senator. There's a reason why that's in there. There are those who say that we should change that. I am not in support of that. So that when you're looking at leadership, you have to look at somebody who is an elected member, somebody who has proven their leadership. They've won their seat, and they can then, you don't have to worry about whether or not that person can be elected. You know that that person can be elected. You worry about that person being able to rally the country and organize the party, deal with whatever policy issues you need to deal with, and take the party into an election. We're not there. We're the step before that, which is actually quite confusing, and it lets people think that, hey, you can't get your stuff together. If you can't get your stuff together, how can you be viable? So that within the current political landscape, to me, that's not a question. That's not a realistic thing. We need people who can win electoral seats and who have won electoral seats. And within the context of that victory, then you can lead a national discussion. This is the opposition, and this is what we're going to do. Because the other persons who would be in there, who would be kind of, you're just throwing a wrench in the machine. You have to lead with people who have won, and then you try to expand your plurality from 5 seats to 15 seats to 20 seats, and then you form the government.
Do you believe that this perhaps is the bitter fruit of failing to put together a proper succession plan coming out of 2020?
So my mom always tells me this. It is not how you found it, it is how you leave it. So my mom was a teacher for many, many years. And I had a reflection on this. And I like history, and I teach history in certain quarters. When in monarchical days, you had a king or queen. The only responsibility of the king or queen was to sire an heir. That's the fundamental responsibility. And so you have to talk about continuity and legacy. And you have to, when you're in office from the very beginning, looking at people who can rise up, because politics is not about one person, and it's not about personalities despite what we think. It's about the public good, and it's about the community and the political space. And as a leader, you have a responsibility to ensure that you leave things in a better way that you found it. And you have to identify people who can champion your vision and who can take the fight going forward. And one of the things that I always reflect on is that people who don't do that are victims of history, because history is written by sons and daughters. It is the future that assesses the past. And so if you don't put that succession plan in place, if you don't identify leaders who can carry a certain heart and a certain vision, they can't tell the story of your success, and the country suffers for that. And so I think that what we are seeing is we're seeing an evolution of those failures to put in place proper systems, because a party has to have that. A party has to have a quick, easy, democratic, accountable, transparent way to choose a leader, and then you move on. If you don't have that, that's a fundamental flaw in an organization. I don't know if I want to be a part of an organization that doesn't have that, because that means that you're about yourself, you're about personalities, rather than being about the people, which is what you are supposed to be about.
But we've seen that happen time and time again in politics. I don't know if I can personally assess what the opposition stands for, what their mandates are, what their philosophies are. Like, I can't sit here and say, they are going to be championing, liberal rights for A, B, C, and D. I can't safely say that about any of the parties in Belize, but that also has hurt them in the sense that for the past couple of elections, regardless of the in-faction fighting and so forth, people don't know what to vote for.
That's a big question. And one of the things that I have often seen in our politics, which I think is a fundamental failure, is getting the parties back to ideological lines, getting the parties back to a set of core principles, so that are you a party that is for labor? Are you a party that is for the environment? Are you a party that is for social rights or economic rights? So that even when we were dealing with the constitutional reform process, which was a beautiful process, I was so humbled by those who led that and participated in that, those emerged a set of policies and recommendations that could really move the country forward. But who is for that, and where do we talk about that? And so one of the problems with our political system and our governmental system is that even when you look at the National Assembly, they're not really discussing policies. And the political parties, we talk about manifestos, but those things are just gimmicks. And when the party gets elected, nothing happens. In terms of the vote, we are the citizens, and we have to keep the political people accountable to what you said you're going to do, and that has a whole heap of ramifications in terms of campaign finance reform, how we conduct elections, how we're dealing with redistricting, and all of these things. And one of the fundamental things which I think is problematic in our electoral system is that I believe that Belize's elections are free. Anyone can vote. We don't have discrimination. So any person can stand for elected office, any person can vote in an elections, but I don't think our elections are fair.
It's not
and we have fundamental questions in relation to that. And you cannot have, I would argue, with any person that we do not have elections that are democratic. You cannot have an election that has 10,000 people in one area and 2,000 people in another area and deal with unregulated campaign finance. And so you're seeing those issues lead into a lack of good leadership and a lack of good policies. And so until we really deal with the structural problems in terms of our democracy, you'll never get reform, and you'll never get change.
Here's the thing, Darrell. A lot of what has happened within the system has become endemic, in a manner of speaking. Because if you're looking at campaign financing, if you're looking at redistricting, if you're looking at any other aspect or tenet of what the system is, you have a lot of fundamental flaws. People take the $50 vote. We've been promised redistricting for God knows how long, and it can't happen. It's tangled up in court and a whole bunch of stuff, right? So how do we then, as you rightly mentioned, look at a system and say, you know, it's working perfectly, it's working for the betterment of myself, for you, and the average Belizean person? It's broken for all intents and purposes.
No, but there are two things that are fundamental, and this goes back to the issue of the People's Constitutional Commission and their recommendations. You have to deal with some structural issues. So the system of government does not lend itself to promoting good democratic values. We have a system, and this has nothing to do with people nor party. We have a system of government that is too centralized and gives too much power to an executive branch with very little influence and power on the legislative branch, and very little influence and power in terms of civil society and the opposition. So we actually need to look at things like the public service reform, because the public service can be a good check and balance. Getting back to this idea of having permanent secretaries, getting back to the idea of completely and fully depoliticizing the public service. So if we have that as an arm of government, like for example, this idea that a minister gives you the key when they're building a house, that's something that they've outlawed in other countries, because that comes from your tax dollars. That's an effect of an efficient public service that delivers good government programs. The political side of government deals with policy, and so the minister will give the policy speech and we're going to deal with that, but the implementation and delivery of service should be depoliticized. But we have a whole system of, well, you go to the minister's office and you get this and you get, and that whole thing needs to be reformed. And then the second thing is, which oftentimes we ignore, is that we have to have questions about leadership. And that's kind of a thing where we need to just talk about it. And we need to just, like I remember when I was going to school, you had student government. How do we teach people? Like, for example, I'm a politician. I've been in politics, I've been in the Senate, I've been in local government. I can't say that I've ever had a political mentor. I can't say that anybody has pulled me aside and say, hey, Darrell, you know what? This is what you should do. This. So you have to figure it out as along to go. And so we don't really have that culture and discussion in Belize about good lead. And this is not even in politics. We have it in business, we have it in the civil society agencies, but we need to have conversations about the ethical use of power.
but we don't practice ethical use of power
Anything.
as citizens. No, we practice abuse of power, and this is something that we don't just know about. We don't talk about politics only when it's election season. We don't want to talk about politics at all, because it's something where if it's not beneficial for me, I don't really care about it. We're not community oriented to talk about how policy affects not just me but everybody around me, and I guess those are the issues that now this is the type of governance that we have. But how do you begin to create that mindset in people? It takes a lot to convince people that change is good.
No, but you can do it, and countries have. So that you have countries in the world, for example, Singapore. You have countries over a relatively short period of time. You have countries like Colombia. You have Barbados. You have examples of countries within a relatively short period of time with successive leaderships that have radically transformed it. And there's no imagination about this. There's a science in relation to politics and social transformation. You want to develop institutions that promote healthy values, both organizational institutions and cultural institutions that could develop the right size of leadership. For example, I travel to Canada on a regular basis. I'm very impressed with the level of political thought, the level of institutional support, social services. We can do that in Belize, but we have to talk about those things, and then we have to put in place reform that deals with them.
Is there the social will to do it, though? It's beyond the political aspect of it. Do we as a society agree that, one, we need to have some kind of reform that would put us in line with what all of these other transformations are in the various countries you mentioned? Then, are we willing, do we have the level of maturity that we say, okay, let's put aside politics and let's just focus as a country on being able to move in this particular direction?
I think we do, and I think all people do, because it comes back to your question that fundamentally it is a self-interest, because the government and the society works for some people, but it doesn't work for the majority. And so there is a self-interest, because I want a good government. When I am visiting any other country, I was in Broward County, I see how good government can deliver for people. You have manicured lawn. Like, I was there and I was kind of, wow, this is very impressive. You had a conference center, and the first question is, why can't we have this in Belize? Why can't we have a beautiful, bright, big conference center in Belize? But fundamentally, it has to do with these conversations, and I think at the end of the day, it has to do with leadership, which goes back to the question of the United Democratic Party. If you do not have right leadership, you cannot change anything. And it's not only leadership in a political level, but it's leadership in business, it's leadership in civil society, and it's leadership that recognizes first and foremost, it is not about me. It is about us, and it is about bringing these ideas together. And so if we have leadership here that is about an internal conflict that literally has taken more than 5 years, that's a long time to get stuff together. That's too long.
And the impression that is being cast is that it's about them.
Yeah.
It becomes the bucking of heads of two individuals who can't, for all intents and purposes, see something different.
And they leave the people behind, because then they're not thinking about them.
And fundamentally then, if we have a system like that, we need to move away from that, because that is not furthering a national development agenda. And I think a big part of it is this question. I mean, it's kind of like a cop-out, but we have to have conversations about the ethical use of leadership. And I do believe that we can have that. And I do believe, because Belize works. I have seen areas, even guests on this show, I have seen Belizeans in the diaspora who really do phenomenal things with very, very little. I didn't even know, but our university has a medical school. And we have leadership there that's really transitioning the country in certain sectors. We need to build on those things. For example, a fundamental thing I always said is, in human resources, when you're dealing with human resources, we spend a lot of our time dealing with the 10% of people we need to fire. The 10% of people we need to fire. So when we're talking about the opposition, we're spending all of our time dealing with this 10% of this. What we need to do is that we need to look at the 90% of people who are making Belize work. And we need to support and encourage those people and get it together with those people. And this 10%, we just cut that off.
I think one of our biggest issues as well, not just as political leaders, but as people in general, we don't necessarily have the patience to wait for the longer things to take fold, right? We want to see the tangibles now. And our governing leaders, they understand that in order for them to get elected, they have to put things out now. Yeah. And, those sometimes don't make for the best decisions. Sometimes we have tangible things that are done haphazardly because we want to be able to create this now change. How do we move past that and look at the intangible that should be able to work for us?
I think a lot of it has to do with public education. And as a leader, I believe a big part of your job is communication. You have to communicate a vision to the people. And when I was mayor, people used to say, "Oh, Darrell, you like up on TV." I had a 100-day plan, midterm plan, mid-year review. Why do you do those things? Those things are important because as a leader, you have to be mindful that you're leading people. And if those people don't come along with you and buy into the vision, everything is for naught. And so there has to be regular conversations. This is why in the United States, they have State of the Union addresses. It's not because the president wants to go to Congress and give a big speech. You have to, in Mexico, the mayors do that. Everyone has check-ins. And I think we do not, in Belize, have a democratic culture that promotes this responsiveness on leadership. You always, if I have an interview, fundamentally you can't refuse it because the media has a fundamental place in public service. So you have to always be communicating this vision, and you have to tell people, you know what, in 100 days this is what we're going to do, but in 5 years, if we put this in place together, this is what we want to do. When we were in city council, one of the big things that we did is that if you don't pay your property taxes, you can't get a driver's license. And after a short period of time, nobody complained about that, and they started to pay their taxes. Why? You see streets. So that if you actually communicate why you're doing things, even if it's penal, even if it has a negative impact, people will realize, hey, you know what? This person is harsh, but this person has a good heart and he's well-meaning. Make we try this, and it actually worked. And it is that notion of leadership that is a relational thing. If you have a leader that has a certain heart, the people are going to agree. They may not say that, hey, you know what, I want to do that, but they're going to agree with the vision and they're going to go with it. And that has worked in many countries.
Darrell, before we let you go,
sure.
Want to get into some personal stuff, right? Do you still have political ambitions somewhere down the road?
Most definitely. So I think that from I was a young kid, I've always wanted to contribute to Belize, and I've always wanted to contribute in the political sphere. That's why I'm doing studies in political science. I became a lawyer. I teach, so I do certain things that keep me very active in terms of politics. I'm still very active in the opposition, probably not in an upfront kind of way, but I think that that's a calling in my life, and that's something that I want to do, if not in the near future, in the long-term future.
In terms of what can we expect from you in the next coming few years? What can we look forward to from this?
Well, you'll see me talking about certain things. For example, I'm very mindful of the 13th Amendment and its implications. I am very keen on this issue of diaspora voting. So, there are certain issues that I think I could lend my voice to, but in terms of politics and electoral politics, at some time in the future, you're going to see my name on a ballot.
Let me interject briefly. Let's get your thought on the 13th Amendment.
So I think that I'm very concerned with that, and I do not support it. And the reason I don't support it is because you cannot deal with fundamental changes in one sense and not deal with structural changes in the other. And that type of power in a system overall that has inequalities and structural problems can inure to the detriment of a certain element of society, which we've oftentimes punished. So the face of crime in Belize is not that we don't have a serious crime situation and we need policing and so forth, but those kinds of fundamental changes to our constitution and our democratic tradition must be done within the context of other structural changes that rebalances the negative harm. So when you're talking about those kinds of serious powers, it's actually dangerous. I mean, when we talk about legal aid in Belize, when we talk about other kinds of things, it's not, our system is fair, but it's easy to go in the system and get caught up in the system. And you need to contextualize those powers with other powers. How can we prevent the fact that this tremendous change will not be abused by police officers, will not be abused by the system. And I am not satisfied that that is the case, and so I won't deal with that. You won't deal with it unless that is part of a slew of reform. And this is one of the things that you had asked. We need to deal with changes, not in a piecemeal way, but we have talked about constitutional reform. We went through a huge process. Incorporate some of those other changes along with this. Don't just do that, because that will just negatively impact poor people within our society, and it will negatively impact certain ethnic minorities and demographics within our society.
My question towards that would have been, how would you have restructured it in order to implement it in a ethical way that would be to the benefit of everyone?
So I wouldn't even consider that. What I would do is, there are other ways, I wouldn't tweak the Constitution in that way. We need to promote greater rights, not less rights. What I would do is that I would have dealt with empowering, and there are practical ways how you can empower policing with the police officers, with the community and so forth. And then we need to deal with, which we have never talked about in this society, we need to deal with more social rights. How do you deal with ensuring that people have education? How do you deal with ensuring that people have land rights? How do you deal with there's an adequate employment and so forth? So if we have those kinds of conversations with promoting a floor of social and economic rights as opposed to strictly political rights, then we can say, okay, then you did not live up to the benchmark. Now we can punish you in this way. What we have done is that we have kept a Belize that is very elitist and very good for certain people, that promotes a great degree of social inequalities. And when people in the lower echelons of society act out, then we punish them and we put them in jail. A marker of success in our criminal justice system is not how much prosecutions we successfully meet. That is not a marker of success. It is how we promote a quality of life that allows people to be anything that they want to be. So that if you say you want to be prime minister, you can be prime minister. If you say you want to be a nurse, you want to be a doctor, we don't have that in society. And so we can't deal with things that will only be band-aids when we have serious structural problems. And I'll give you an example. We're dealing with this, which is more than likely is only going to deal with certain types of crimes. What about corruption? What about the other serious kinds of crimes that we just look around and we ignore?
Yeah.
So we're just doing that, but we're not looking at ourselves, and we're not being internal in terms of our systems, and that promotes injustice.
Excellent.
All right. Well, I wish we had more time with you, but next time you do have to come back. I really want to get into that diaspora relations conversation.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, we are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, it's all about Mental Health Awareness Month. Don't go away. We'll be right back.